Chapter 3. The Great Sea Queen. The lighthouse of the gods shone magnificently in the brilliant sunlight as the witches stood silently in honor of the sea witch. Pink, purple, and golden blossoms showered down on the crowd assembled to mourn the passing of a great and terrible queen. Nanny had put Ursula's remains in a ship constructed of delicate golden straw, adorned with beautiful seashells and glittering white sand. The ship sparkled in the sunlight and was reflected beautifully by the rippling water. The waves glittered with the golden straw that was mingling with the blossoms in the water. Circe nudged the ship gently, sending Ursula farther into the waves. "Goodbye, Great One," she said softly. Ursula looked peaceful. Circe was thankful to Nanny for bringing Ursula's remains together so they could honor her. It was a proper tribute that befitted the Queen of the Sea. Circe knew if Triton had given Ursula her rightful place by his side as ruler, she would still be alive. And that was what hurt Circe's heart most. Circe held Nanny's hand tightly as they said goodbye. It tugged at Circe's heart to let her friend go, but she was thankful she had Nanny, Princess Tulip, and Prince Popinjay by her side. They all looked pensive as they took in the magnitude of the great loss. And it was unnoticed by anyone else, but Circe saw Popinjay had taken Tulip's little hand in his. He squeezed it gently as if to remind Tulip that he was there for her if she needed him. Circe smiled because she knew the beautiful princess could meet any challenge that came her way without Popinjay's help. Nevertheless, Circe was happy he was there for Tulip. Triton was not in attendance. He had been warned that he was not welcome, so Circe was surprised to see that merfolk from Triton's kingdom had come to pay their respects. She had to wonder if Triton had declared his complicity to his people, and if that was why some of them seemed to be truly mourning Ursula's passing. Did some of them have pity for Ursula, or at least understand her motives after they'd heard her story? Perhaps they were simply there to see with their own eyes that the sea witch was no longer a threat. Circe didn't know. One of the mermaids from Triton's court swam up to Circe and Nanny. She was pretty, with a small pointed crown made of delicate coral. Her voice had a familiar soft ring to it. "Hello, my name is Atina," the young mermaid said. "I'm Triton's eldest daughter. He sent me here to see that his sister was given a proper funeral." She looked at the witches, who were staring blankly back at her. Out of nervousness, she kept talking. "I hope you don't mind my sisters and I being here." Nanny looked at the group of mermaids. All of them were looking in their direction, worried expressions on their faces. "If you're here to honor her, dear, then you are more than welcome." Circe looked at Atina suspiciously. "I'm surprised you're here after everything Ursula did to your little sister." Atina smiled, but her eyes were sad. "And I'm surprised you honor her so graciously after she nearly destroyed you." Circe could sense the young woman was conflicted. The mermaid was torn between her loyalty to her little sister Ariel and her obligation to the woman she hadn't known was her aunt. "I'm here for my father, and for Ursula. For the woman she could have been had my father not ruined all that was good within her," Atina added. Her answer was good enough for Circe. "You are welcome here, then, Atina. Tell your father we gave Ursula a funeral fit for a queen. That's who she was, and that's who she always will be." Queen of the Sea. The mermaid swam back to her sisters. Together they watched the procession of ships escort Ursula's exquisitely constructed ship of golden straw farther out to sea. Fireworks shot from the ships, casting golden lights into the sky. Beneath them, Ursula's ship was taken by the tides, the fine straw dispersing and releasing her remains to the sea, where she would rest forever in tranquility. Circe took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. Her old friend was finally at peace. For a moment, Circe felt at ease. She was experiencing one of those perfect moments in time when everything was beautiful, even the heartbreak. And she wished that she could live in that moment just a little bit longer. But the present was quickly becoming the past as she heard Nanny gasp next to her. In the distance, the witches saw a large mass. It looked like a living forest entangled by thorny vines, climbing and twisting its way toward the rocky cliffs behind Morningstar Castle. And with it came a terrible looming darkness that harbored something sinister. Soaring over the darkness through the turbulent clouds streaked the swirls of green light, were Maleficent's crows, the very portents of evil. Circe could feel the fearsome forest energy with her magic. She knew the forest was not coming to destroy them. It was trying to protect Morningstar from the dark fairy. Chapter 4. The Land of Dreams. In the Land of Dreams, things worked differently than they did practically anywhere else. Almost anything was possible in the dreamscape. The land was frozen in perpetual twilight. The never-setting sun cast on an ethereal glow and created a special brand of magic known to some as the Golden Hour. All inhabitants of the Land of Dreams occupied their own spaces, like many little hamlets in a kingdom of an unfathomable size. Each chamber was composed almost entirely of mirrors, and if the dreamers could master the magic of the mirrors, they would get a glimpse of the outside world. However, the dreamscape's magic remained elusive to most of the realm's visitors and befuddled some of its more long-term occupants, making it a terribly lonely place. Magic was not something unfamiliar to Aurora. Although her fairy caretakers had hidden their powers from her for the past 16 years, she had always sensed something magical about them. Aurora never talked about it with her fairy aunts, but she knew when the magic was near. She didn't know why, but it hadn't frightened her. She could also sense the magic moving into other kingdoms, even in those farthest from her. So it wasn't difficult for her to puzzle out how to use magic in the Land of Dreams. Aurora reasoned the magic one could wield in that world wasn't particularly powerful. If it were, she would have found a way to wake herself. It seemed Maleficent's sleeping curse was too powerful for the dreamscape's magic to overcome. Besides, the magic in that place wasn't direct or even particularly practical. It was rather basic and mundane, yet somehow simultaneously unpredictable and chaotic. Nevertheless, the princess had harnessed it to see into the outside world. Aurora's corner of the dreamscape was an octagon chamber built entirely of towering rectangular mirrors. She could see reflected in the glass a myriad of past and present events throughout the many kingdoms. Initially, she had wondered if the room and images were merely a dream, but she had decided that they were real. That simple decision gave her the power to control the images that appeared in the mirror. Aurora had quickly realized all she had to do was think about someone she wanted to see, and their image would appear in one of the mirrored glass panels. She could see where that person was and what they were doing, which made her feel less lonely in the strange realm. That brought her comfort, even if she knew she might never again walk in the waking world. It was strange having so much knowledge at once and having so little power to direct her own fate. But she listened, she watched, and she learned. Aurora discovered that her betrothed was actually the young man she had fallen in love with in the forest. She learned that Maleficent had arranged to keep him captive in her dungeon. She knew her fairy aunts had changed her name to Rose to protect her, and she knew why. She knew everything. She even thought she knew why Maleficent was doing all this, but that part was too terrifying to think about. So she focused on other people. Aurora looked in on her fairy aunts, who seemed to be planning a visit to witches Aurora didn't know. Sometimes Aurora looked in on her mother and father while they slept. She tried to see what they dreamed, but she couldn't. The princess supposed their dreams were their own. She even tried to find them in her dream world, but it seemed that traveling between the chambers was impossible. So Aurora tried to be content with acquainting herself with her own story. She watched events from her past scroll by in many mirrors of her chamber. Flashing images cascaded across her vision, and she saw herself as a baby on the day of her christening. There, in the dreamscape, Aurora first laid eyes on Maleficent, the tall, stoic, dark fairy. She was probably the most beautiful creature Aurora had ever seen, standing there among all her parents as guests. Aurora had witnessed how she'd become trapped in this realm, trapped in a sleeping death. Why'd she'd spend so many years with her fairy caretakers, believing that she was someone else, a girl called Rose who never thought she was a princess. She honestly didn't know what was worse, living her life in the dream world, or living in a world where everyone lied to her. A voice echoed through her chamber. "Oh, we know. We know which is worse." Aurora spun in circles, searching all the mirrors. She couldn't see who was talking to her. "Over here, princess. Or should we call you Rose?" Aurora whirled around again. Peeking out on the right side of the mirrors was a strange-looking woman. She was wearing a bright red, voluminous dress cinched very tightly at the waist. Her tiny pointed boots stuck out from under the hem of her skirt. Aurora wasn't sure why, but there was something sinister about those boots. They looked like two slinking creatures slithering out from under a curtain of blood. Aurora reminded herself that this was the dream world, and she shouldn't let her imagination run wild. But nothing about that woman seemed right. Her features were all out of proportion, her deathly pale skin, large bulbous eyes, pitch black hair, and tiny red lips. Nothing quite fit. Just then, two more women who looked exactly the same entered the mirrors on either side of the first, creating a trio. "Yes, we are three," they sang together as one. "This has to be a dream," Aurora said to herself. "These women can't be real." "Oh, we're real, princess," the first woman said. "Welcome to the land of dreams, little one," the second one chimed in. "Yes, we have been searching for you," the third one added. "Maleficent will be happy we found you," all three said in unison. At that, the sister witches began to cackle, their laughter sending chills through Aurora's heart. Chapter 5. She Belongs to the Crows. As Nanny and Cersei watched Maleficent draw near to Morningstar Kingdom, Nanny's thoughts drifted to places long forgotten. The distant places she previously preferred to keep locked away in the deep recess of her mind. But something inexplicable was happening. The closer the Dark Fairy got to Morningstar Castle, the more Nanny began to remember. It was a painful process, because the memories weren't just her own. They were Maleficent's as well. And in that moment, Nanny resented having the ability to read minds and to feel her loved one's emotions. She almost wished for the days when she thought she was just Tulip's nanny, unaware of her powers or her past, or the great love she had for Maleficent. But rather than fighting the memories, she succumbed to them. She let them wash over her like a torrent of half-remembered dreams. And she opened her mind to Cersei, sharing her thoughts. Maleficent had been born in the fairylands, in the hollow of a tree filled with screeching crows. She was little and defenseless, and she seemed to be made up entirely of sharp edges. Her features were pointy and her skin was a milky green pallor. Terrible nubby horns were starting to emerge from her bony little head. Nothing about her was right. Nothing at all. All the fairies feared her because they found her appearance disturbing. They'd left her there in that tree, alone, for no one knew who had abandoned her there. If her parents hadn't wanted her, then surely the fairies didn't either. For all they knew, she was actually an ogre, or something too vile for even the likes of ogres. Besides, she didn't have wings or pleasant features, and there was a distinct air of evil about her. So clearly she couldn't be a fairy. No, she wasn't a fairy at all. At least, that was what the fairies told themselves. to console themselves when they stayed up late at night, wondering if they'd done the right thing by leaving the defenseless little creature in the hollow of an old tree. Whatever her origins, she belonged to the crows. The crows will care for her, the fairies told themselves. She must have been born of their magic. After all, everyone knew crows were evil. The fairies called her Maleficent. They had named her after Saturn because of its unfavorable influence, and after Mars, a malicious god known to cause destruction and war. That was what the fairies saw in her future: malice, devastation, and conflict. So the crows cared for her. They brought her fruit from the tables of other fairies. Sometimes they even took clothes off drying lines so that she would have something to wear. The clothes smelled of sunshine and flowers. They were warm from the sun and soft on her small frame. And so it went until Nanny, one of the legends, came home to the fairylands. She had come to take her place once again as head mistress of the Fairy Academy. It was twilight when one of the legends arrived in the fairylands. Her light blue eyes sparkled and her silver hair fell to her shoulders in loose curls. The sunset was a deep purple with brilliant wisps of pink and orange streaking the sky. Already the stars were visible and they seemed to twinkle more brightly when the one of the legends was near. The one of legends smiled, happy to be home again, but her smile faltered as she spied the young fairy crouched in the hollow tree. Maleficent was 4 by that time and still all sharp edges. She was nothing like the round little fairies that flittered around the fairylands like fluffy bumblebees pollinating the flowers with glittering magic. To the other fairies, Maleficent looked ill. She was too skinny, too green, and far too pinched-faced. And her horns, those horrible horns, made her look more evil than anything else. But the one of legend saw something others didn't see. She saw a lost little girl who needed love. "What are you doing in this tree, child? Where are your parents?" the one of legends asked. The little girl didn't answer. She wasn't used to speaking to anyone other than her crows. In fact, she was almost certain that this was the first time someone had ever spoken directly to her. Though the woman's face was kind, Maleficent wasn't used to anyone making eye contact with her. She certainly didn't expect to see a pleasant expression when someone looked upon her. Usually the fairies wrinkled their noses at her when they bothered to look at her at all. "Speak, child, who are you?" Nanny inquired. Maleficent tried to speak, but she couldn't. The only sound that came from her lips was a terrible screech that reminded Nanny of a hoarse crow. My goodness, this poor girl has never used her voice, not once, not even to cry. The realization broke Nanny's heart. Maleficent wasn't sure if she even had a voice. Her crows spoke to her in their own way, and they understood her without her having to talk. The one of legends understood the problem. With a wave of her hand, she gave the small green fairy the courage to find her voice. "Now speak, dear," she said encouragingly. "Hello?" Maleficent's voice sounded like the croak of a frog, scratchy and strained. But she had spoken for the first time. It was frightening and exciting at once. "Well, that's a start, isn't it, my dear? And what's your name?" They call me Maleficent." "Who, dear? The crows? Who calls you Maleficent?" Maleficent shook her head slowly. "The fairies." "Do they now?" Nanny knew exactly why her sister and the other fairies had named the child Maleficent. It sent a hot surge of anger coursing through her body. Nanny tried not to let it register on her face, and she smiled down at the little girl. "And why, may I ask, are you here all alone?" Nanny continued. "Where are your parents? I will have quite a thing or two to say to them for leaving such a little fairy alone in the cold with no one but crows for company." "This is where I live. The crows are my parents. When the one of legends looked up at the crow, she saw concern in their eyes, and she knew that the girl was telling the truth. How in the fairylands could my sister have stood by and let this happen? Abandoning the girl like this? Leaving her to be cared for by the crows? It's a disgrace. Will you let me take you home with me, little one? Nanny asked. I can care for you. Slowly, Maleficent shook her head. No. No? Why not, may I ask? Nanny tried not to laugh. Maleficent looked so stern and so decisive, especially for one so young. I don't want to leave my crows. Then we shall bring them with us. How does that sound? And looking up at her crows for a moment, Maleficent slowly nodded. Maleficent's life utterly changed that evening. Nanny could see that no one had ever treated Maleficent like she was anything other than something to be feared. She was glad to be able to give Maleficent the love she deserved. Maleficent felt safe with her and called her Nanny. And that was what she was, her Nanny. Though Nanny cared for Maleficent like she was her own child. Together they lived in a beautiful Tudor-style cottage with gingerbread trimmings and large pane windows. Nanny magically replanted Maleficent's crow tree in the front garden, and she fashioned a wonderful tree house just for Maleficent so that she could visit her crows whenever she wished. Nanny insisted on always keeping a window open so that the crows could come into the cottage whenever they liked. They often flitted in and out, checking on their little fairy to be sure Nanny was treating her well, which she always was. She loved Maleficent dearly and was unspeakably happy to give this special girl a home and a family to call her own. Hey there, everyone! Hope you enjoyed chapters 3 through 5 of Serena Valentino's Mistress of All Evil as much as I did reading out loud. So, remember a few videos ago I mentioned Ursula being Ariel's aunt? Isn't that crazy? So, basically in these chapters we've learned that Ursula's funeral occurred, but her brother was not attending and he wasn't also welcome there. So we believe that he betrayed her, but we don't know why or how, which I think we'll find out in a couple of chapters here going forward. But we also learned where Maleficent came from Nanny's memories. So she basically comes from crows or their magic or somehow. And I think that's pretty awesome. But what was your favorite part, or what was like your aha, your OMG moment when you were listening to this story? Go ahead and leave it in the comments below, or if you have a question, just ask me anything and I'll be replying back to you guys. While you're seeing the sketches on the screen, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell notifications so you get notified when the next chapters are posted. Or if you like to view any other videos besides Storytime, also give this video a thumbs up. Lets me know that you're enjoying the story, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!